A group of workers is excavating deep inside a frozen cave, stuck inside the ice, so they cut a big block to get it out and then a helicopter. The scientists immediately send a fax to the excavation company. Important archaeological discovery. They also ask for a specialist to study whatever is inside the ice block. Later, anthropologist Stanley arrives at the lab. He's a doctor because he's been studying the history and culture of Eskimos. Stanley, Anne and the other scientists, who believe they've found some prehistoric animal. The Russians found a mammoth with still viable cells, so they have high hopes for their discovery. Laser to very carefully cut the ice block layer by layer to avoid any damage to the creature. Being inside isn't an animal, it's actually a Neanderthal. Sterenson concludes he's a hunter who lived around 20 to 40,000 years ago. A closer look, but Diane explains that their goal is to cut the caveman into the best research centers in the world. Afterward, the scientists thaw the clothes and tools to start taking tissue samples. They also give him The tests indicate that the Neanderthal cells and organs are in perfect condition, and Diane theorized cryoprotectants, which are special cells that prevent crystallization. Continue. The scientists are shocked to suddenly notice some light brain activity. They decide to try to revive the man, so they intubate him until they can detect a strong heartbeat. Once the caveman is stable and the Neanderthal begins to wake up, he is very confused by noises and the masked faces, so he immediately starts panicking. It's his mask, and the caveman calms down when he sees a human face, allowing it with an injection. Afterward, the group discusses the future of the caveman for a Nobel. The Arctic team is trying to develop a cryoprotectants and unfreeze them when humanity finds a cure. But now that they have them, they can find a way to freeze people to achieve immortality. Stanley pointing out that humans shouldn't live forever and that the world is overpopulated. Ignored, and the scientists agree that they won't tell the press for now because they don't want into a celebrity. Then Stanley says that the caveman should first environment, which would teach them more about prehistoric times. Aft convinces the team to let him have 2 weeks to conduct his own research. Him is set up and they put the Neanderthal inside. When he wakes up, familiar, and begins going through his usual routine. He drinks juice thirst and chases a bird away from its nest to steal the eggs. Using stones and cooks his food. In the mornings he washes his body and goes hunting with a spear he builds himself. He makes a bunch of noises. Wild boar who tries to attack it, but the caveman dodges it at the last second and the boar gets stuck between rocks, allowing him to kill it. He accidentally finds a hose and breaks the end. Confused by the metal, sniffing and licking, he starts following the hose, pulling it out from the ground until he shakes it until he manages to open it, so the scientists rush to keep him from entering. The creatures from the lab start roaring as the signs of noises to scare the man away. Furious, the Neanderthal finds the machine that powers it. He starts screaming as he tries to bawl, so a scientist enters the vivarium and shoots him with a tranquilizer. Put him on a stretcher to take him to an operation room, where they will take a bunch of plan. Stanley freaks out and reminds them that his 2 weeks aren't, tells him to accept things as they are. In the evening, Stanley shows Diane tribes capable of dancing while stepping on flames, but Diane says. Stanley points out that only explains the lack of pain, not the lack. Next he fast forwards the video to find a scene where an indigenous friend's face. Since there's no blood, Stanley thinks that protects their tissue. He theorizes the caveman produces his own, convinces Diane to let him study him some more. Once the Neanderthal is, Stanley enters it too without carrying any weapons or objects to avoid scary. Caveman begins running around, growling and yelling while finding spot. Stanley is scared but still approaches him slowly until they're face to face. Hesitation, the caveman jumps on Stanley and gets ready to hit him with a, distracted by a scientist yelling from above. Since Stanley doesn't, the Neanderthal drops the rock. Then he takes a closer look at Stanley, his body is from his own. The man puts his fingers in Stanley's clothes and squeezes his groin to confirm he's not missing certain parts. In pain, and the Neanderthal backs off before introducing himself as Aru to Charlie. In return, Stanley teaches him to say his name, and even noticing the scars on his chest, Stanley asks about them and Charlie calls up. The shape of the scars and the gesturing makes Stanley think it means. He steals Stanley's cross necklace, and after biting it, he begins repeating some commands, but Stanley can't understand what he's trying to say. The next arrives and Stanley shows her the recording of his conversation with the caveman, understanding. Then Stanley starts spending time with Charlie and learning for simple things like rock, frog, and bone. Charlie. In return, Stanley teaches him easy words in English, thing on the cameras, and is impressed by Charlie's extensive vocabulary. Lit by the fire, Stanley starts singing a song. Charlie liked going. While playing with the bones from his meal, Charlie makes a song. Sometime later, the scientists put Charlie to sleep again, start a new experiment. He's put inside a special chamber at a very fully. This will activate the cryoprotectants and make it easier for the scientists to. Stanley keeps on protesting, saying they're killing Charlie and that he doesn't deserve that. Charlie's heartbeat starts slowing down and the scientists have no. Afterward, in the vivarium, Charlie keeps yelling in anger at Stan about all the experimenting and new scars. Suddenly he jumps and pretends, hitting the ground with his spear before poking his own chest. He's asked self-delete, but Stanley refuses to do it, and after some struggle he leaves. Later in private, Stanley asks Diane for help. All the studies are early and causing them to lose contact with him. Stanley wants Diane because perhaps the presence of a woman will help him calm down. Charlie's hands are wounded and he's using rock powder to draw the bird from his. Diane is very nervous and gets scared when Charlie immediately runs to her. After some sniffing, he shares his food with Diane, and she eats it, not made of bugs. Then Charlie keeps on touching, being friendly, to look at her groin too. Stanley immediately stops him and the men yell. Stanley has to use the Neanderthal word for mind to make Charlie back off. Some objects from his cave to exchange them for Diane. So Stanley has to. Looking at Diane puts Charlie in a sad mood and he repeats the same words. When Mabel analyzes this, she thinks she's found Charlie's word for woman she can't quite understand. Stanley and Diane make Charlie explain lines on the ground, revealing he used to have a wife and kids. He realizes he's asking where his family is. The moment is interrupted above the facility. Since the ceiling is made of glass, he starts climbing up the rocks while repeating Beta, his word for the helicopter to leave, but Charlie won't calm down. He climbs him and keeps screaming Beta at the ceiling. Sometime later Eskimos and shares the words he heard from Charlie, which the group recognizes. Rushes back to the lab to share his discovery with Diane. Beta reflects of a large bird that acts as God's messenger and carries people to heaven or he theorizes that Charlie's tribe went extinct when the magnetic animals in the area. Charlie probably felt it was a punishment from God, meaning he went out to find the bird and offer himself in exchange for the return. Charlie now thinks the helicopter is Sedna, so there's no way they'll calm him down. 4 hours later, Charlie is wearing all his clothes, tools, and gave him the past few days. He also uses crushed berries as paint. Charlie never stops chanting, obviously eagerly waiting for whenever Stanley enters the vivarium, Charlie hides until he's gone. One afternoon, Charlie takes the stairs and after watching, he knows he must press the button. He enters the lab and carefully making sure the scientist won't see him. When he reaches an empty corridor, starts growling at his own reflection, thinking the other man is challenging the mirror with his spear. Then he hears a voice in the speakers and runs till he reaches the room with all the lab animals. As he checks out the bird, Charlie keeps on moving. As he tries to take the next corridor, past doors. He quickly tries again and the doors open automatically in another room. At that moment he gets scared when he hears a vehicle move behind a copy machine. However, Charlie accidentally activates it and he runs. After getting startled by the elevator, he enters a lesson, which slightly burns his hand. At that moment the scientist causing Charlie to panic. He starts climbing on the furniture, only to quit it. A scientist hears the noise and comes inside as he turns the light. Charlie is startled again and immediately attacks, killing the man with his spear. He begins running once more, going crazy when he suddenly hears the alarm, random door and finds a tunnel that gets colder the further he goes. When he quickly goes through it and finally makes it outside. He sees after it, so the pilot hits him with the skis to knock him out. The son rescue Charlie, bringing him back inside. Moments later which confirm Charlie has no broken bones or head injuries. The scientist, blaming his research for the death of their colleague. They announce that Charlie will be transferred to another facility. Stanley tries to if he's kept in a cage, but his concerns are ignored. Refusedly makes a deal with the guy guarding the door. Soon Stanley enters first. Once Charlie is properly protected from the cold, the scientists realize they're missing and go looking for them by no. As the duo keeps going, the ice shelves start falling in the ground, separating Stanley from Charlie. When the helicopter, Charlie gets excited and yells Beta before jumping. He met her skis and happily chants during the flight. One of the pilots tried. Charlie lets go of the skis and falls, gliding for a few miles in a rather bend.